Good afternoon, everyone, and a very happy Erev Shabbat. In preparation for our wonderful Sabbath, we are together again for the Henry and Lisa Manoucheri Parsha Shiur. Our guide is Rabbi Akiva Zweig, Rosh Yeshiva at the Talmudic University of Florida. Be sure to check out the recording that will be posted afterwards, and there are also previous shiurim that are on YouTube and Spotify, so be sure to check them out if you have a chance to, and please share them with your friends. Today, the rabbi is going to be discussing Parshas VaY'chi. The topics will be obliterating authoritarianism, internal and external, and the journey from religion to Judaism. The month of Teves is sponsored lovingly by the children and grandchildren of Yidel Shayovich on his 60th birthday, Mazal Tov, and many more. We are grateful to mark this milestone, and may he be blessed with many more. All his children and grandchildren wish him a year filled with continued spiritual growth, happiness, light, and good health for all Am Yisrael. This week's class is dedicated for a Refu'ah Shalema, complete healing for Perel, Sasha, Bas Meril, Rivka, Yehoshua ben Faiga, Chaya, Shlomo
Yes.
ben Baila, and Moshe ben Simcha. Without further ado, Rabbi Akiva Zweig, and please mute yourselves. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. A joy to be with all of you. And as Aaron Yehuda mentioned, our sponsors and the titles of the class, I'm not going to review that. I am going to mention that it's always a joy to meet new people. We have with us today Susie Edelman, I believe, Edelman. That was introduced by Dr. Finkelstein, and welcome. We are very privileged in this group to really be dealing with an august crowd of thinkers, truth seekers, people of tremendous substance in their personal lives and their professional lives, and it's an honor to be with everyone. Today, we have in front of us the task of understanding the conclusion of one of the fascinating volumes of the Torah, the book of Genesis, and the way that the Torah, at the end of the volume of Genesis, pays attention to various details is rather fascinating. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that Joseph was put into a coffin in Egypt. Okay. I wouldn't have thought that that would be the concluding climactic sentence of this most incredibly inspirational and awe-inspiring Torah volume that begins with creation, and Joseph was placed in a coffin in Egypt. That seems a really, let's call it, not exciting ending. Number two, the Torah speaks of a long mourning and burial process of our forefather Yaakov, and how Yosef and Egypt and the brothers traveled up to the land of Canaan, i.e. Israel, and then they all come back. And then when they come back, there's this very interesting conversation. But before we get to the fact that they all come back, we have a whole description that Yaakov says to his children, listen, guys, bury me in the cave that's in the field of the Machpelah, that is on the face of Mamre in the land of Canaan, that your great-great-grandfather Abraham purchased from Ephron the Hittite for a burial place. And by the way, I buried Leah there, and Isaac buried Rebekah there, and Abraham was buried there with his wife Sarah. And by the way, all of this happened from the Hittite people. As Dr. Finkelstein texted me earlier this week, he said, interesting that it seems like Ephron gets so much play here, almost more than when he actually sold the cave. So that's an interesting observation. Yet another thing of note that the Torah is making emphasis here at the end of this sefer called Genesis. In addition to that, we have the Torah paying special attention to the fact that Yosef saw descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh to the third and maybe the fourth generations, and that they're born on his knee. Okay, that's nice. Yiddish anachas, as they say. But why is that an important detail and a finishing touch, if you will, on the Sefer of Bereshis? And then, of course, we have the famous guarantee that the Jewish people will be redeemed called Pakod Yifkod. Yosef says, you should know Hashem will surely appoint you and bring you up from this land, remember you and bring you up from this land to the land of our ancestors. And he makes everyone swear that when that happens, to bring my bones, bring Yosef's bones back up to Israel. And then the Torah concludes that Yosef died and he was embalmed and put into a coffin in Egypt. Very, very fascinating conclusion of this very auspicious sefer in the Torah. Okay, so that's one area that we need to explore. Now, on Wednesday, we went into significant detail about the blessings that Yosef received exclusively in contrast to the rest of his brothers. His brothers actually got most of them blessings. Some of them, it's hard to understand how they are termed blessings, but they're all considered to have blessings. But Yosef got additional to that. He got his own blessing with them. But before that, he comes to his father with Ephraim and Menashe, his two sons, and they get extremely special blessings. And Yosef himself is given this privilege that his two children are going to be considered tribes of Israel. That means that they are part of the founding ancestors of the Jewish people. We think of them as the 12 tribes. In a certain way, it's the 13 tribes because Yosef splits and becomes Ephraim and Menashe. Now, we did discuss this in great detail on Wednesday, and for anybody who did not yet hear it, I recommend that you go back and listen to it because you'll see how this dovetails with what we are discussing today. I just want to point out about that whole sequence of the special blessings that are received by Yosef and Ephraim and Menashe, that it's incredible that the brothers have no issue with that. Everybody talks about how the coat of many colors was the instigation of the jealousy and the hatred, and ultimately what led to the brothers wanting to kill Yosef and then deciding instead to sell him. But the point is that this seems to be much more extreme than that, right? It's one thing, the father gives him a special cashmere sweater from, I don't know, whatever designer brand it is. But it's a whole different thing to say, listen, Yosef, you're going to get your own spectacular blessing in addition to a regular, quote unquote, blessing that all the other brothers get. Plus, your children are going to occupy two spaces, two tribal lineage points of inheritance of the land of Israel, and everybody else only gets one. And in addition to that, he also inherits the city of Shechem, where he's ultimately buried. So talk about preferential treatment. It's major, and yet somehow the brothers are okay with it. So why is that, or how is that? So what I'd like to do is bring us on a whole kind of Odyssey explanation of the Sefer, the volume that we call Genesis or Bereshis, and explain why Parshas VaY'chi is an incredible conclusion to that, and how that directly leads to the discussion of authoritarianism, and how to actually dispense with it, how to obliterate it, and what I would call internal and external authoritarianism. Let's just talk about that for a moment. I had the privilege this past week, 2 days ago, to visit with Prime Minister, I should say, Bibi Netanyahu, who visited South Florida, along with a group of about 150 people, and then after that with a group of about 1,000 people. And it was wonderful to hear him speak, and it was great to see so many supporters for both the Jewish people and the state of Israel and concerns about anti-Semitism in the world. And it was a great event. But I think that's something that needs to be added to the message of strength, resolve, and courage that Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu was discussing, is what we're going to talk about today, which is how do we deal with all the factionalism that's within our people, and what really amounts to, again, a struggle for power within the state of Israel, within the government of Israel, within our Jewish people, at the same time that we're dealing with what Bibi referred to as the eighth front war, right? We know the seven, Hezbollah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the eighth is worldwide anti-Semitism, and what we're witnessing as a major problem for Jews all over the world to be able to feel safe. Sydney, Australia, what happened in Washington, D.C., and that we know way too much of, right? So that's the eighth front war. So I think there's something major to be added that the Torah is specifically delineating for us here, and I'll just point it out very simply before we go in depth. There is no doubt that the central character that is the conclusion of the Sefer is Yosef. Yosef is the man, and there is no doubt that he succeeds not only with the Jewish people, but with the Egyptian people, that is the major world power of the time. That is a given, just on the bare facts of the story. Now we have to understand how. We have to understand why is that a fitting conclusion to the book of Genesis. So what I'd like to do is take us all the way back to what is one of the most heinous crimes of the universe. When I was a youngster, people would say, who wiped out the greatest percentage of the world? And the real answer is Cain and Abel, right? Because when Cain killed Abel, it's about 25% of the world, right? Maybe it's 17%, but it's the entire world, right? That's the answer that was given. So this is definitely a story that needs much understanding in the Torah. And from a philosophical perspective, it's more mind-blowing than I think most people give it credit for. So we know that there are wicked people in the world, and typically we think of wicked people as people who either think that God doesn't exist, or they're just relegated to the back of their minds, right? That's the general concept of a Hitler, may his name be obliterated, and. And even if they say that there is a God, how much could they really mean it? But to have a person that commits this kind of a tragedy be somebody who actually speaks to God, well, that's interesting, right? Cain himself has a conversation with God. And not only that, he brings an offering to God. So now we have to ask ourselves, what is Cain thinking? So let's go into the story a little bit, and we're going to discuss how this directly leads to our topics today of authoritarianism, both internal, meaning within the Jewish people, and external. So what Cain does is he brings an offering to Hashem, and that offering is one that's not of very good quality, which is why God does not pay attention to that offering. And the rabbis explain it because it says he brings of the fruit of the ground. He doesn't say he brings the best, as opposed to his brother Abel Hevel, who does bring the best. He says, over there, the Torah says he brings from the sheep of his flock and from the best ones, from the fattest ones. By Cain, it doesn't say that, and therefore it's assumed, and it seems that that's what the words mean, he brings inferior quality. But it's important to point out that he does bring it first. It's his idea to bring an offering. And this is the first time that we find that human beings bring offerings explicitly mentioned in the Torah. So that's also interesting. Why is Cain bringing an offering? What's motivating him? But also, why in the world would he bring something that's poor quality? Who does that? The question I always ask people, you can imagine you're invited to a party, you're invited to celebrate someone's birthday, or you're simply invited to their house for a Shabbos meal. And you say, wow, thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate you having me over. You're doing so much for me. I brought you this paper cup. If you could please accept it as a gift. Right? Nobody would do that. And all the more so, not to God himself. But then we have to ask ourselves, he does this, Cain, he brings that offering, and he gets very upset. And God says to him, why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? Don't you know that if you improve, you'll be able to overcome your evil inclination? In other words, don't you understand that what motivated you here was your evil inclination, but you could overcome him? And if you do, everything will be great and you can rule over him. But if not, he's waiting to bring you down. So what happens? Cain has a conversation with his brother Hevel, and he says something that we don't know. The Torah just says he spoke to him. We don't know what the conversation was. Cain gets up and he kills his brother Hevel. Now that's just impossible to understand, right? This is like the teacher who shows one student favoritism, and you would think that instead of being angry at the student that was favored, you would say why you would be angry at the teacher. Why is Cain thinking that, oh, I have a great idea. I'm angry at God because he didn't accept my offering. So if that's true, then why doesn't he instead get angry at God and lash out at God. Why is he killing Hevel? And Susie, your suggestion is interesting that Cain was seeking a kind of dominance or favoritism in suggesting offerings. We're going to explain that, but I think it's actually a lot more insidious even than that, which we'll explain in a moment. But that's definitely a good track of thinking. Henry's back. By the way, Henry wanted everybody to know that he hasn't lost a step. He's been traveling, but he's listened to the classes, and obviously we're all thrilled to have him back. Welcome back, Henry.
Thank you.
So the point is that Cain kills Hevel, and we have to understand why. But even more astonishing than that, we're talking about Cain, who just had a conversation with God. God says, hey, don't you know you can improve? He goes out and he kills his brother. And then when God says to him, Cain, where is your brother? He says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Now, you have to know that we have a principle that the rabbis teach us, that whenever people have a conversation with God, it's unequivocal. They know for a fact that it's God, creator of all, that spoke to them. And he's saying, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? I mean, that's beyond moronic. So here's what I'd like to suggest. And yes, Susie, we're gonna I think talk about that point also, but maybe I'll get to that at the end. Here's what I suggest. There's a very simple question. When God created the world, was his intention to give it to man, and that this is man's domain, and therefore it's up to man to make it or break it, and man is in charge? Or is it really that it's God's world, and what God wants is for man to fulfill a certain purpose in the world, but that ultimately it's really a world that is controlled and run, so to speak, by God? That is the fundamental question. Now, of course, this is a free choice question in general, and if anybody wants to talk about it more in our questions and answers portion, I'm happy to get into it more. But just for now, to understand the story, the word Cain means koneh, which means to acquire. That's what the word means. Koneh means to acquire, and the Torah even says that Eve named him Cain because she acquired a man together with God, which means she produced a man. Obviously, it's also cryptic and needs to be understood further another time, but definitely it is coming from the word acquisition. And what Cain is saying is a very simple thing. He's saying, God, you created the world, no doubt. I owe you recognition and I pay you homage to that fact. But at the end of the day, God, the world is now mine. Thank you. I appreciate it. The world is mine. And the reason that Cain does not bring the nicest offering is because Cain wants to make it very clear that he is not declaring with his offering that, God, you're the creator of all and you own everything, and I recognize that you're the one in charge. No, I recognize that you're the one that created everything and you gave it to me. Thank you. And goodbye, which is what many people do when they say thank you. Now, in Judaism, the word for thank you is actually todah, which means hoda'ah, to thank, but it also means vidui or modeh, which is to admit or to confess. In Judaism, thank you means I acknowledge what you did for me, and I admit that you did for me, and that is the beginning of a relationship, not the end. Now, you know, there are people that definitely want thank you to be the end, because then when the person doesn't seem to be so happy that they said thank you, they said, what do you want? They said thank you. What do you want from me? I said thank you. And so therefore, exactly, the internalization of gratitude is the internalization of I was cared for. I mean something to the other. I want to be in that relational space. That's what thank you ought to be. And it's unbelievable to use it as a way of rejecting the other person and saying, you did me a favor, shkayach, you know, you're a great person, now leave me alone, right? And thank you, goodbye. But that's what Cain wants. To which God says, Cain, why are you angry that I didn't pay attention? Don't you understand? I want a relationship with you. And the only reason that you think you don't is because you have an evil inclination that is ego-driven, that gives you a sense of entitlement, that gives you a sense of wanting to acquire. And guess what? That's really a lonely place to be. And it's going to bring you down. Today we call that depression. Today we call that addiction. And it's going to kill you. Don't you understand? That's what you're doing to yourself. And Cain says, wait a second. I think of this, and every time I share this and I think about it, I'm always blown away by Cain as being literally the most brilliant character in the Torah. Cain says, wait a second. You're telling me that I'm wrong? That you created the world, but that you're in charge? And that you're in control? I have an idea. I'm going to kill Hevel. Now, does Hevel deserve to die? Does God want Hevel to die? He just accepted his offering. He's the one that is in God's good graces. And guess what? Cain can accomplish. He can actually kill Hevel. He does. He kills him. And God comes to him and says, Cain, where's Hevel, your brother? And Hevel says, how should I know? Am I in charge? Am I my brother's keeper? Or are you? That's his question. If you're right, how does Hevel die? Now, another time, we'll discuss the answer to that question. But that is the definition of evil in the world. The proof that evil people always bring is, look what I was able to destroy. Never look what I was able to build. Ever. It's always about what they can take down. Oh, I can assert control. So I'm in charge. And every time, we have a tendency to think that other people are evil and we're not evil. We forget what happens when we get angry. When we get angry, what we do is destroy. A question that I've asked thousands of people is, have you ever gotten angry, done something while you were angry, and been happy about it later? Never, right? Because it's ultimately destructive. Because it's ego-driven. And it's complete self-absorption, which is why the rabbis say it is compared to idolatry. Because what it is complete entitlement and self-justification to do whatever I want. And in the vernacular, we say, that's it. I've had enough, right? That's what happens when a person gets really angry. That's it. I've had enough. Question, enough of what? Enough of restraining myself from doing what I really want to do. And so I no longer restrain myself. I'm shackleless. I can do whatever I want, and I'm totally justified. That's what anger is. Sefer Bereshis opens with this story just after the Garden of Eden to tell you that when man chose evil, he introduced into himself this inclination towards this ego and towards this sense of entitlement and the ability to justify world domination, what we call today authoritarianism. That's exactly what was chosen, and Cain brings it out to the fullest extent, to the point where the theological worldview is, sure, there's a God, but God put me in charge. I get to decide. And the man with the power is the man that rules. That's what the Cain worldview is. And the rest of the Sefer Bereshis is to lead to the man and to the people that stands for the exact opposite of that ideology. There is no character in Sefer Bereshis that has more right, more entitlement to claim damages and revenge for horrors that were done to him than Yosef. He's the one, more than any other character. I would say what the brothers did to Yosef as a victim is worse than what Esav wanted to do to Yaakov, what Lavan did do to Yaakov. It was worse. But instead of Yosef becoming a reactionary human being, he becomes a completely proactive human being, complete self-control. But not only that, he says, the whole purpose that I had to suffer that at your hands was so that I could help you, so that I could be there for you. And that is a Jew. And the authoritarians of the world cannot stand that way of thinking. And so the Torah here in Parshas VaY'chi is telling us very, very clearly the incredible level to which Yosef grows and not only aspires but achieves, and that is the human being that can obliterate authoritarianism in the world. The only person that can truly stand against the ones that have the power and the ones that would take control over everything and everyone and lead the world into, one way of thinking, whether it's the Aryan race or it's Amalek, or you just pick your Haman, you pick your authoritarian of choice. The only person that can stand against them is the person that represents the opposite of ego, the opposite of entitlement, and the opposite of domination, but not only as a face that he presents to the world, but as a face that he actually lives with his own family, which is really hard to do it with your own family. Not too many months ago, we held a panel on estrangement and to oneself. Thank you, Susie. Yes. We did a panel on estrangement. And tragically, I think here today in the 2000s, 2020, wherever we are now, 26, almost every single person knows of a person that was either cut off or cut off others of their own either nuclear family or adjacent family, right? Grandparents from grandchildren. Who doesn't know a grandparent that hasn't been estranged or cut off? I don't know. I know way too many, right? Or a child that cut off their parents. Way too many. This is what's happening within our people because of ego and entitlement. And the only way I can deal with somebody is on my terms, not on their terms. The rabbis say that when Cain and Hevel had this conversation, they were actually having a theological argument. This is the Targum Yonasan that says they were arguing, is there a judge? Is there judgment? Is there reward? Is there punishment? Hevel was saying, yes, there is a judge, there is judgment, and there is punishment and reward. Cain was saying, no, there isn't. And Cain says, I'll prove it to you. Boom. And what ends up happening? All of Cain's descendants perish. A new son is born to Adam and Eve by the name of Shes, and the world descends in a completely different way from a third son of man. So at the end of Sefer Bereshis, it's not only that we see the greatness of Yosef. So first, let me answer why the Torah concludes with that sentence that Yosef was put in a coffin in Egypt. Because that coffin gets resurrected and it gets taken out of Egypt. As Yosef says, you must take me out of Egypt. And the rabbis tell us that when the Jews were standing by the Red Sea with Egypt behind them and the sea in front of them, the sea saw the coffin of Yosef and split. Because the person that represents truly living in the image of God, what is living in the image of God? I create the world for people's sake. And I completely tolerate their abuse for their sake. And I want to suffer through their sins for their sake. The sea sees the coffin of Yosef and responds, oh, Yosef is here? The Jewish people have to get to the land of Israel. They have to reach the promised land, and it splits. Because Yosef represents the paragon of the man that was created in the image and likeness of God. Because the man that has complete proactivity is the man that's using his God-given self-control to make the best choices for the good of the world. That's who Yosef is. And so the Torah is concluding Sefer Bereshit that Yosef is put in a coffin in Egypt because even in death, his greatness has tremendous power because he accomplished it. He built it into his family. They carry that message with them. That's what the Jewish people are doing when they take his bones out. And even physical nature will respond to that greatness because ultimately it's God that is in charge. But the Torah is also telling us that the blessings, and this is the part of the shiur that we did on Wednesday, again, listen to that, please, that Yaakov is doing here is by elevating Ephraim and Manasseh to be equals to the other tribes, and by acknowledging that Yosef has this unique gift to unify with other people, and so do his children, that his own children completely tolerate, you know what, you think you're the firstborn, but actually the younger one is more important. Ephraim, you're getting the bigger bracha. Menashe didn't do anything wrong, not to himself and not to Ephraim, but it's the right role for him. And what does Menashe do? Okay. Yosef doesn't like it. He tries to move his father's hand, but his father says, "Nah, I'm telling you, this is the way it needs to be." Welcome to the first time in Genesis where children are actually accepting the direction of their father. He tried to do that with the coat of many colors, but the children didn't accept it. He does it with the children of Yosef, and they totally accept it. And then on top of that, if Ephraim and Manasseh are somehow equal to Yosef, so now Yosef is somewhat diminished because Yosef doesn't inherit the land of Israel. Ephraim and Manasseh inherit the land of Israel. Yosef is fine with that. But then you know what Ephraim and Manasseh do? They allow their children to be born in Yosef's lap and to grow and be developed by Yosef because they're giving him the fatherhood place, just like he gave them a brotherhood place. That's unity. Says Yaakov, okay, now it's time to discuss Mashiach, which is the next paragraph in the Torah. Let's talk about unity. Let's talk about everybody that is a Jew being perfectly comfortable with what they can do in their role, not which party is going to have the prime minister and the coalition of their choosing. It's not about that. It's about how do we unify? How does everybody take their rightful place despite whatever they would have assumed is their rightful place? And that's how you can have a king over the Jews and over the world for 80 years with complete success. If you have the Yosef mentality, and if the people around are willing to unify, like Yosef is willing to unify, if you make it all about what you can contribute instead of what you can control, that's how you obliterate authoritarianism. What we Jews need to do more than anything is figure out how to coalesce, utilize our individual strengths, and not be thinking about who's in charge. We need to completely submit to whatever the mission is, bring our best talents to the table, and work together to achieve a true harmonious blending that is, what do you call it, nonpartisan, right? Completely nonpartisan. If we could do that, we can also show the world a true model of being able to create a society that functions without jealousy and without entitlements, without domination, without oppression, all these things that the Western world has been struggling to survive and failing so miserably and failing so miserably in solving them, because at the end of the day, we look around and we say, this person was after the money, and this person was after his power, and this person was after the money, and that person was after his power. That's always the way it is, except for Yosef. Except for Yosef. The entire country of Egypt trusted him completely, and the brothers hear all of this blessing that Yosef is getting. They hear of all of this extra that it seems that Yosef is inheriting. And they're 100% good with it. You know why? Because they've learned the lesson that Yaakov actually knows how to unify them. Yosef is a necessary component of how to be unified. And that's why on Friday nights, we bless the entire Jewish people with the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. Be one like Ephraim and Manasseh and Yosef and Yaakov presented that model of unity, and then the Jewish people will flourish and succeed, and then we'll be able to obliterate both internal and external authoritarianism. Now, I just want to go to one more very important point. I talk about going from religion to Judaism. And this is also a very important thing to understand. By definition, religions are authoritarian. I'm sorry, but they are. They are. Because they're saying this way is the only way, and if you fold in, you're good, and if you fold out, you're either toast in this world and the next world or the next world. That's what religions are, and that is not Judaism. Judaism is the only what people call religion, that it's really interested is in truth and good for all mankind. And Judaism is 100% wanting and willing that all people of the world should have good in this world and good in the next world. No, they don't need to be Jewish in order to have that, but they could be Jewish. But they don't have to be Jewish. What is actually a more tolerant, more selfless ideology in the world than Judaism? The answer is it does not exist. And that's why whenever there's a power grab in the world, you have to get rid of these Jews. That's literally why, because they stand for the fact that there should be no power grabbing. And so what's very important is that us Jews need to go from religion to Judaism. We need to understand that Judaism is not a religion. It is a pursuit of truth. I know everybody likes to say it's a way of life. No, no, no. It's a pursuit of truth, of ultimate truth, and the Torah teaches us the ultimate truth. And the ultimate truth is that God wants all men, all humankind, to be good in this world and good in the next world. That's what God wants. Now, it's true that if you want to take responsibility for that, yeah, that's called being a Jew. But if you just want to enjoy that, you could be any person. No problem. And so we Jews have to go from religious to Jewish. And Judaism cares about all people. How could you have a more fitting conclusion to Sefer Bereshis, which is the creation of all man, and all the devastating stories about the destruction of man brought about by man, and the authoritarianism of man, Cain and Nimrod, and you just go down the line, and idolatry, to the one person that accomplishes the unity in his people and the unity in the world power of the time being Egypt. So why does the Torah spend so much time on the cave of the Machpelah? Because it was in front of the entire world. And the world needs to know that this is the legacy of the Jewish people. First of all, we pay for our property, as much as people think we're colonialists. And we're totally willing to pay through the nose to do what's right. Second of all, we're completely above board. We want the world to know that our legacy is our ancestry. And what Avraham stood for, and what Yitzchak stood for, and what Yaakov stood for, is to create the people that produce Yosef and his brothers with all their warts, but ultimately their transition into becoming great human beings. That's our legacy. And that's a legacy that's not only for us, it's for the Hittites of the world too. It's for the entire world to see that we want Israel not because we want to dominate the world. Isn't that insane? We want Israel. We want the tiniest piece of land, not so that we can dominate the world so that everybody could have the whole world, but instead we'll be the colonialists. When the rest of the world wants the whole world to be theirs and everybody to be like them, and all we want is, no, everybody should be like who they are and just let us be the people that facilitate that. Great. But the problem is that nobody should really be in charge except for God. And religions and authoritarians don't like that. Now we'll get to the questions or comments. We have things on the chat. Arnie, who do you want to take it away?
Yes, absolutely. I see Arnie Rothman has his hand raised, and everybody please try to use the react button at the bottom that has a raise your hand option. Go ahead, Arnie.
I love what you said. Thank you very much. God bless you. But my question really begins at the very first sentence of this Parsha, where Rashi where it says that Yaakov lived, and Rashi says, "Why is this passage closed?" And right away, even before Yosef gets to do his magic, before he dies, we're already we're entering Gullus. We're entering the end of, at least the way it's described with Rashi, for the Egyptians began to enslave them because the Jews were not, we just, we just weren't practicing the way our patriarchs were. My question is almost, why isn't Joseph one of the patriarchs? I mean, it's that,
Yeah,
why does it end with the death of Yaakov? Or
that's a
maybe
great
it's,
question. And meaning, why is it that the exile is so necessary if Joseph can be so successful? Is another way to ask the question, right?
thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer is the proof is in the pudding. And by that, I mean that as much as the brothers learned their lesson, it's not so complete. I'm not going to go into the proofs for that right now. Most importantly is the verse that we have in next week's Parsha, that a new king arose over Egypt that did not know Yosef. Now, why did he not know Yosef? And my answer is because the Jews did not know Yosef any longer either. So the Yosef identity was not internalized to the point that the Jews prevented themselves from assimilating or idolatry. To some extent they didn't assimilate, but they certainly had major issues and were not able to be the example that Yosef was of integrity, morality, and subscribing to God. They were not able. And that's unfortunate, that even though Yosef and his brothers did so much to accomplish what they set up as a great example, it did not become fully pervasive to their descendants. And that's why in next week's Parsha, it says Yosef and all of his brothers and all of that generation died. And right after that, and a new king arose over Egypt that did not know Yosef. So this concept of legacy and the way that legacy works, and it's very important for us children to know that, is that it's not only about what the parents do, but it's about the children ascribing it back to the parents, which is what the Torah is doing here at the end. Yaakov is saying, I buried Leah, and Yitzchak buried Rivka, and Avraham buried Sarah. He's literally going through the whole history. Now, Susie is expressing another question. Yes. The exile was needed in order to give all the Jews the opportunity to be like Yosef. The short answer is yes. And that they don't succeed, truly. They actually don't succeed. But at the end, they do acquire some of the Yosef identity, at least 20%, depending on how you hold that whole thing unfolds, with the identity of the Paschal Lamb and circumcision, which is a very Yosef type of identity. And again, that's why he plays such a major part of the story. We need to know when they left Egypt that Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. Right? That's because that identity is absolutely what we need, both for internal and for external.
Okay. I think speaking of emulating Yosef, we have our own Yosef Vital. So please go ahead.
So I like to look at the practical application of your teaching, Rabbi, because that's where the juices are. So
Yeah.
my feeling is that, or my thoughts are that Joseph was successful because he used all his challenges to deal with his core issues. He dealt with his core issues. He didn't look at somebody wronged him, said, what did I do wrong that I am in this situation? So when you deal with your core issues, you tend to be less angry, you lose less control, you are at peace with yourself, and you realize that you are valuable, and that's when you can fully express yourself and do good in the world.
100%, right? So you want to finish?
No, I think that's my...
Yeah. No, that's 100% the beginning of the practical application. I spoke about anger for that reason. Yeah. And it's about you being able to be yourself, which is 100% true. But what happens is when you become yourself, you also model that for other people and they become themselves too, which is why Yosef is such an important galvanizing, unifying force among his brothers. So, there's this famous concept of the circle of concern and the circle of influence, right? The more that we focus on the circle of influence, that means the more that we're actually focused on what can we accomplish. And then the more that actually is able to expand. But when we focus on the circle of concern, that is things that are out of our influence sphere, like what's happening in the White House and what's happening, blah, 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 right? And then we can't actually give energy to what we can do. And so then the circle of influence actually diminishes, becomes smaller and smaller. So that's another way to think about it. And definitely that's a practical application. And I think that as Jews, we need to model it for each other.
Mm.
And we don't do a great job, whether it's the shul that I don't daven in, right, the famous joke, or the fact that we're much more interested in breaking off and splintering rather than unifying. There was
But I think
yes,
an interesting project will be is that how we create the condition and the environment for us, first of all, to deal our own issues in a non-judgmental way.
yeah.
Because that's when we can get together and really solve problems.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. So first of all, personal work is huge, and that's what we spend a huge amount of time on, and that needs to be the beginning. But like somebody asked me recently in Miami Beach, I'm here in Miami Beach, and they asked me recently, what would I like to see in the Jewish community here in Miami Beach? And I explained to them a certain kind of teaching, but then I said, we probably have 30 places a person can go pray on Saturday morning, like probably 30 different places just on our street. Wouldn't it be great if even just once a year everybody would come to pray together? Even once a year. Let's just all pray something together. I don't know if it'll ever happen. But I think that would be a practical example. Let's just pray together for something.
Mm. Yeah.
Dr.
I
Patterson.
see. Yeah,
Yes.
and by the way, especially looking forward to this because Dr. Patterson always has always shared some great insights on Cain and Hevel. So when you brought that up today, I was always all excited, hoping he's going to comment on that or whatever else. So please go ahead, Doctor.
Aaron, thank you. I don't know if I can live up to the expectation, but the Sefer Bereshis ends the way it begins. Bereshis is not the beginning or the first thing in a sequence. It's the first principle. The most fundamental premise is bara, which, as Ramban teaches, means is a cognative bris, a breed, a covenantal relationship. It begins by establishing relationship as a first principle of creation and as the first principle of humanity, of the life of the soul. The Zohar says, interprets Bereshis bara et ha-shamayim et ha'aretz. It says Bereshis bara ata, God created the you. The relationship, who we are, lies in a relationship. The soul draws its breath from the between space of a relationship, neshama neshima. It begins, it's framed, Sefer Bereshis is framed by this relationship to the brother, framed by, the questions, where are you? Where's your brother? What have you done? That's the Jewish question for which the authoritarian seeks a final solution, trying to get rid of the question, where's your brother? What have you done? The original temptation is you will be like God. Come eat this. It will give you power. You'll open your eyes. I came, I saw, I conquered. We conquer with the eyes. The eyes acquire the name of Cain. But you can't. To get rid of God means getting rid of the prohibition against murder, as we are taught. We read the Luchot across. It's Anochi Hashem means lo tirtzach. To get rid of God is to get rid of the prohibition against murder, and you can't get rid of God without eliminating that prohibition. Because God is transcendent, it contains all worlds above and below. God is as creator. The relationship that is fundamental to our brother, to our fellow human being, does not end with the passing of that human being into the next world, the upper worlds. As you say, our legacy is our ancestry. Our legacy is our testimony that we inherit this is such a profound blessing that we have. Think of the ancestors that the Jewish people have. Talk about giants, Chachamim. They give us something that we have to live up to if we can. And so I think, just my last word on this, last mention, what we see in the end from Yaakov is the first ethical will. In other words, we have a tradition of ethical wills, fathers teaching their children their legacy, transmitting whatever wisdom they think they may have, gathered in their lifetimes. Memory. To bury the dead is to memorialize, and we return the yard site, the unveiling of the matzeva. We have ways of maintaining relationship. Kaddish is an affirmation of relationship. So I'm so pleased that you addressed this today. And Bereshis, we got the first principle. Now we can go to the Shemot, the names, which is about, actualizing the relation, is names. Anyway, thank you, Rabbi.
No, thank you. So definitely appreciate the emphasis on relationship, and that God created the other, and we exist in the relational space. And what a blessing it is that that's our legacy. Totally.
I don't see the icon, but I think Susie wants to say something. So please go ahead. Were you, or you were, that was just a wave? Okay, sorry. I thought
there was a fly.
Oh,
okay, all right.
but
Sorry about that.
but she has been saying
I
on the
misread.
chat, which I've
No,
been.
excellent comments. I just had a thought, and it is such a dilemma for us because Jews try to do good in society. We try, we say, well, Yosef is a real role model of a Jew that can operate in the world at large and help his people and live ethically and be a model unto the nations and so on. And yet, right after him, what he basically does is puts Jews in a position of advantage where we forget how we got there. So my question is, how do we make a difference and do good without getting carried away and thinking that it's us and not falling in the trap, of thinking it's not Hashem, that we're just so clever and we've been accepted and people like us and people like our ideas and we're making such a wonderful difference and we're saying all the right things to whatever group we're targeting, and yet we end up being resented in the long run for these things. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that happens to us a great deal. So what's the balance between being like a Yosef and not getting carried away and getting in trouble?
So, I really this, ego is great. There's a lot to say on this subject. We could probably do at least a class or two just on this subject, but I'll give a couple of simple, kind of principles to think about. One is that it's not about who I am, it's about my contribution. Right? So the minute that we are quick to associate our contribution with me and who I am, we have a major problem. And we know this from Hillel, who says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? We need to focus on the purpose of me being me is the way that I can contribute to others. And there is no daylight between those two concepts. It's not like there's me and then I get to also do for others. No, the only use of me is how I can contribute, which is the way God deals with creation also. God doesn't need anything from creation. He is only doing it for the created beings. So to be in his image is that it's only for that purpose. Now, a good indicator is, if you're holding by that, is when you thought that you should be something and for some reason you're not, are you paralyzed and dejected and depressed? Or are you like, okay, so I guess I'm meant to be a different contribution and I'll look for that. right? So that is a good barometer. Now, I will say, and it dismays me a little bit to say it, but unfortunately, I think it's important to be said. I mentioned that I went to the meet of Bibi Netanyahu here in South Florida, and I am disturbed at the lack of attribution of anything to God by all the people that spoke. And I was able to count on one hand how many times God was mentioned in, let's call it 2 hours of speeches. And that's not okay, right? Because we're not understanding the miracles that the Jewish people have experienced these last 2 years. We're thinking again, exactly what you're talking about, Aaron Yehuda. Oh, it's us. And to that, I have a very simple rebuttal. That means it was you on October 7th too, right? So that's a problem. And so I think that, it's easy to get carried away if we're thinking in terms of me and not in terms of what's my usefulness. Now, even in the secular world that tries to address it, they don't do a perfect job. For example, a program that I really am a fan of, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I talked about, with the Torah perspective, they have a term which is a great beginning, but it really falls very short of the mark. It says balance courage with consideration. That's the language. A person should balance courage with consideration, meaning don't overemphasize yourself, be considerate of other people too. And so you can be sure with that kind of an ethos, people are going to make a lot of mistakes, right? Because people are always going to look for the me, which is exactly what entitles people to cut off their fathers or their grandchildren or their children or their grandfathers. That's the estrangement that we're talking about. Instead of saying, what is my role in this particular situation? And I know that, so many of us on this call have firsthand experience with that. And we wonder what's gotten into today's generation. And the answer is basically the culture of an affluent society, which allows people the kind of wherewithal to say, I get to have things the way that I can handle them, not that I'm meant to handle the things that happen in life. That I have a mission to handle those things. Yeah, I could give many, many more examples. So, like I said, this could be a whole subject into itself, but I think that those elements are very, very important. And there's no way that Yosef could have done what he did with any sense of it's about me. And to whatever extent he struggled with that, he overcame it ultimately, as we know.
Yeah, that's implied in his bracha when it's such a crazy Rashi where it talks about how he withheld his sperm, but it came out between his fingers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one heck of a metaphor Rashi uses to describe that in the bracha, no less.
Yes. He does represent that, total commitment to not giving in to his ego, even though that would be like the most natural thing in the world.
And the metaphor then, that Rashi concludes with that's what makes him instrumental. Hence, it comes from his fingers, that he can then become an instrument of service in the world, and literally rearrange the world because it's not about him.
Yeah. Another way to kind of prove it, and right exactly what you're saying, Dr. Finkelstein, is how many people who would have achieved Yosef's level of ability and position would have been happy to live the life of Yosef? I mean, what does he get from all of this in the end? Really? 80 years of public service, right? He never fully is able to pay attention to, his personal life. And what's he doing with himself? A lot of people would think like, that's pretty not good. He doesn't get material benefit from it, so what's the point? And the point is, no, that was the point. The point is he's of major service to the rest of the world, and that's what he's useful for, and that's why he's the example of what's going to bring the Mashiach, the redemption, even from Egypt. Yeah. Yeah. So, Susie, one of your comments I just want to ask you is, because I'm not an expert, and we have Dr. Patterson, and maybe Dr. Finkelstein also knows, can you parse totalitarianism from authoritarianism?
Yes, well, so
Please.
totalitarianism is not just being authoritarian, it is the coercive, you basically have to, you have to basically force everybody to adopt a certain mindset. And so every part of society, that's why it's called totalitarianism, is organized around coercion of what is even in your mind, not just prescribing of behavior, right? Authoritarian would be you do something wrong and we have certain things that we do to crack down on it. But totalitarianism would be more Maoist or Soviet, where it's if you have incorrect thinking, then we have a right to try to send you to a camp, kill you, whatever.
So, question, because that's really interesting, and thank you for bringing it up. The mullahs of Iran today.
You asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Of course. That's authoritarian. Yes.
Not totalitarianism.
No, that's totalitarian.
Oh, it is totalitarian.
Yes.
Yes.
It's just less effective than they would like it to be at this moment.
Correct.
But yeah.
Okay, so what regime today would represent authoritarian, not totalitarian?
Sorry.
No problem. Is there a regime today that represents
maybe it would be Russia currently.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that's totalitarian. I would say it's authoritarian.
Now we had the privilege in Henry's house to greet the son of the Shah, and we talked about what is the Iran of the future. Henry, you have any updates on that with what is going on? Any idea?
A ton of updates. There's a lot going on. Major protests in the streets, and many of the IRCG bases are captured by the people. So we'll see where it goes.
Wow.
And something big is going on the others. The whole country got our people. So it could be happening this time. We'll see.
Wow.
Very, very serious.
Any elements of the military joining the people in the revolt?
Yes, many have taken their uniforms off or have stopped. They refuse to shoot the people. They've now imported Palestinians and Hezbollah people to basically fight with the crowds.
Wow.
They've done this in the last 40 years. They just brought a whole bunch of them in. And there's been all these Russian transport planes flying in. I don't know what they're bringing in. It could be weapons and God knows what. But it's very bizarre what's going on. It's spreading like wildfire.
Wow. One would think that this will start getting reported in mainstream media, right?
You can go on YouTube. I'm sorry, the noise in the background, Matt. It's called under TOUSI 2CTV. There's a British Persian guy that does a live podcast every day. It's about a 35-minute update, and he shows a lot of stuff you don't see in the news. And it's all in English. He has an eloquent British accent. Does a fantastic job. If you watch 2CTV, you'll see what's going on. So.
Wow. Okay. Very fascinating. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Great Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos, thank you.
Shabbos.
Fabulous class.